So we're learning Perek Yud Aleph of the Even Shelaima. Perek Yud Aleph, you'll recall, is about Inyanim of Mashiach, Inyanim of Geula. And we're really up to Sif Yud. And here he starts off with Sif Yud the following, because I want to compare two paragraphs, one at the beginning of the Perek and one here at the end of the Perek. He says, Kol ha'inyanim shebechodesh Tishrei. Everything that is connected to the month of Tishrei, the first month of the year, Haim Remez Liyasid Lavai, is an allusion, a hint, to what will happen in the future. The Chagim of Tishrei are remazim to the process of Geula. And he says the following, Ki mitchila hu yom hadin b'Rosh Hashanah. Right? Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Hadin, a day of judgment, a day where God determines who will live and who will die. Liyasid Lavai, there will be what is called Yom Din Hagadol, the ultimate final judgment, who will live, who will die, who will be Zeicha to Mashiach, who will not be Zeicha. So Rosh Hashanah is both the Yom Hadin for my future year, for this year, and Rosh Hashanah is a remez to the Yom Hadin Limos HaMashiach. V'yachar kach, Salichas ha'avaynais b'yom HaKippurim. So let's think about this for a moment, because indeed Rabbi Yisrael Salanter pointed out that there's something a little not fully logical, at least initially, in the order of things. We have a Yom Hadin, and then we have a Yom of Kapara. As God first judges me based on my mitzvos and my averos, am I deserving of life or death? And by the way, Chaim doesn't just mean life, but it also means health, wealth, prosperity, whatever it is. And then we have a second day, 10 days later, which is the day of forgiveness. If you do tshuva, you're forgiven. Rav Yisrael Salanter asked that logically, it should go the other way around. Like, what's the point of God judging me and then giving me a chance to undo it by tshuva? I mean, doesn't it make more sense to say, okay, you have a year, and in your year there are mitzvos and averos. You're going to be judged on them. So, hey, why don't you do tshuva? Indeed, we actually tell people to do that. We tell people to do tshuva during Elul. So that's what it is. Do tshuva during Elul, so when you're judged on Rosh Hashanah, you'll be judged favorably. So why isn't the Jewish calendar that way, Gufa? In other words, why not have Yom Kippur before Rosh Hashanah? In other words, I'm given a chance to do tshuva. I'm given a chance to be metaken. And then after I've done that, God says, okay, now I'm going to judge you based on everything that you've done, including the tshuva that you've done. So Yisrael Salanter used to ask the kasha, why shouldn't there be a Yom Kippur before a Rosh Hashanah? See, this way we have an awkward idea. We have to have two stages of judgment. Rosh Hashanah, God writes down, Kol Ksiva, who will live, who will die, but he doesn't sign it. Then we have Yom Kippur, where God decides whether he's going to sign it. Well, why do you have to have those two stages? Just say the following. Just say there's only one stage. God makes final decisions, and he'll make it after Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur should be first. And then Rosh Hashanah. So the teretz that's given is that if there wouldn't be a concept of divine judgment, I wouldn't be nisorer to do tshuva in the first place. Meaning the concept has to be that I have to know I'm in big trouble. Meaning one of the big motivators. Yeah, I understand this is an inferior tshuva. Ultimately, a person should do tshuva out of love of Hashem, tshuva out of love. And of course, that's a much higher madrega. But as a practical matter, a person does tshuva because they know they're in pretty big trouble if they don't do tshuva. So the concept would be, God judges you, and then I'm really afraid, maybe that judgment is I don't deserve to live, so I need that pachad of judgment to be ma'arer me to tshuva. I remember, but I don't want to get into this matter too much because it's a little chutzpah from the mascaras of Torah. But when I was in law school, and a prior Gilgal, it's Chatoyani Maskara. So, I'm from Hartford, Connecticut, and I was in law school in Boston, Massachusetts. So I used to go to my parents. I used to go home a lot because I was right. So I figured one day, since law school didn't have tests during the Zaman, and they didn't take attendance, so I just figured I would just go home from Rosh Hashanah to after Sukkot. And I knew the assignments. I didn't. What's the difference if I went to class or didn't go to class? So I was gone for like 3 weeks. I kept up with the work, whatever it is. So when I come back, there are like 20 letters waiting for me. Because unbeknownst to me, this professor was assigning assignments that I was not responding to because I wasn't there. And the letters were getting progressively more severe as time was going on. Like the first letter said, you're a little late with your assignment, please notify me. Second letter. By the 20th letter, it says, if you don't, call me within 24 hours. Baruch Hashem, I was back within 24 hours. I'm going to initiate expulsion proceedings. That's pretty scary, pachan. So I have to say that just to show you, I have proof that fear is a great motivator. That was my best course in law school. So the emes is, this is shalom l'shma. When a person has a pachat, they're scared. They're scared. So the Rosh Hashanah says we need a Yom Hadin where we literally know our life is in the balance. And then I said, hi, that's going to be ma'ir me to tshuva. That's why you have to reverse the sequence. So says the Gra, but what's a little less clear is the Gra says that the same thing is going to happen liyasid lavai, because the Chagei Tishrei are merumas to liyasid lavai, in which there's going to be the Yom Hadin, and then there'll be a Selichas Avonos afterwards, when people do tshuva. We'll come back to this. Now, v'achar kach Sukkos, Shmini Atzeres. Well, okay. In other words, in our calendar, we have Yom Hadin, which is Rosh Hashanah. We have Slichas Havainis, which is Yom Kippur. Then we have Sukkos. Then we have Shmini Atzeres. Right? Those are the Chagim. Now, v'chein. Now he's going to explain it. V'chein liyasid lavai. The same pattern is going to be true in the future. Techila is Yom Hadin HaGadol. There is what is called the ultimate final Yom Hadin. Tzadikim Rishayim. In fact, it's hard to know exactly, to quantify this, because, the psukim about Acharis Hayamim, there are many, many psukim about Acharis Hayamim. I mean, much of the book of Daniel, 6 prakim in the book of Daniel are in Acharis Hayamim. And you have Zechariah, and you have Yeshayahu. I mean, they go through all the Nevi'im that most people never get to, but there's much talk about Acharis Hayamim. But if you try to correlate the descriptions, meaning one sefer describes this and one sefer describes this, and these are the descriptions of the wars of Gog and Magog, much of which we actually are experiencing right now. But there are psukim that say only 1/3 shall remain and 2/3 shall be destroyed. Now, what's interesting is there's a machlokas among the Meforshim what that even means. Does that mean only 1/3 of the Jewish people will survive and 2/3 will be destroyed? Or is that referring to the Goyim, the Umos Olam? Right, one is much more ominous than the other. Other psukim talk about only 1/10 of the Jewish people surviving. And others are midame the Gula Achrona to the first Gula of Mitzrayim, where 80%, 4/5 died in the plague of darkness, and only 1/5 survived. So whether it's 1/5, 1/3, 1/10, there seems to be a lot of destruction of Klal Yisrael themselves, bi'acharis hayomim, and therefore there will be what is called the Yom Hadin HaGadol, but there will be an opportunity for tshuva, which is a kiyum of the pasuk in Yecheskel that we say in Slichais. V'zarakti aleichem mayim tahirem. Hashem says, I will sprinkle upon you waters of purification. Ki eslach liasher asheir. I will forgive those that remain. Now again, this is a little complicated because it seems to be a certain percentage is destroyed without the opportunity of tshuva, and the remnant is given the opportunity of tshuva, meaning there are going to be Rishoyim that are not even going to be given this opportunity. By the way, there's another famous vort that there are two metaphors, two mishalim of water that are used regarding the tshuva process. One is this pasuk, B'zarakti aleichem mayim tahirim. I will sprinkle upon you pure water, and you will become purified. Now that is using the analogy of para aduma. If a person has tumas mace, so on the third and seventh day from the time they touch the mace, or were in the oil of the mace, they have to get sprinkled, right, with the water, spring water mixed with the ashes of paraduma. The second analogy to water that is used is that of a mikveh. Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. Hashem is a mikveh for Am Yisrael. And Rabbi Akiva darshans, Maha mikveh mitaheres atzmeim, just as a mikveh purifies the impure, Kach HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitaheres Yisrael, so too does HaKadosh Baruch Hu purify Yisrael. In fact, this is actually a song, a niggun, that is often sung in Simchas Torah, right? Rabbi Akiva, it's the last mission in Yuma, Ashreichem Yisrael, happy are Yisrael, and it ends with Maha mikveh mitaheres atzmeim, Av HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitaheres Yisrael. So you see that the tshuva process, the forgiveness process, is described as mikveh, and it's also described as v'zarakti aleichem mayim tahirim. So why do we have these two mishalim? So it's very interesting. There's a very big nafkamina in the purification between mikveh and paraduma. In order for mikveh to be valid, you have to have total immersion. If I go to the mikveh and there's even one hair that's not in the water, the whole mikveh is invalidated. 99.9% of your body in the water does not count for 99%. It counts for 0%. It's nothing at all. Totally worthless. Now, with haza'ah, which is paraduma water, spring water mixed with the ashes of paraduma, it's exactly the opposite. How much of the water has to hit me? How much of my body needs to be covered with the ashes of paraduma? A drop. The Kohen sprinkles me. If one drop hits me, that's purification. So mikvah represents total immersion. Haza'ah is even a very small part. So these are two different madregas in tshuva. Sometimes there's a tshuva that is a total transformation of a person. Indeed, if a person comes to Ohr Somayach, they weren't Shomer Shabbos, they weren't keeping kashrus, now they've decided to change their lives. That's a very high level of tshuva. That's a tshuva that is a total transformation. Every part of you is changed. So for Shteitzach, that is the tshuva, that is the highest level of tshuva. But let's say a person is not yet ready for total transformation. Let's assume, for example, that a person has certain averos. Let's say, even Gabi Shabbos. Let's say a person is Mechalel Shabbos, and he wants to become better, but he's not ready to have a total transformation. So he decides he's not going to smoke on Shabbos. He'll do everything else, but he's not going to smoke on Shabbos. Or maybe even worse than that, he'll only smoke in the bathroom on Shabbos. So a person might think, what's the tachlis of doing a partial tshuva when I'm not really changing? Right, I'm still eating treif, I'm still mechalel Shabbos. So the chiddush of haza'ah is that even a tiny drop of tshuva counts for a lot. Einochinami, it's not complete, it's not total, but one should never think that it's insignificant and not chashuv in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just because it's not total, because that's called the tshuva of haza'ah, even though it's not the tshuva of mikveh. Okay, that's an agav, but that's the pasuk the Gemara brings. So we have the Yom Din Agadol. Then we have Slichas Havaynais. Then we have Sukkah. Now, what is Sukkah? Chupos Sheva Ki Yadua. This is a remez. The Gemara in Bava Basra says, Liyasid Lavai, Hashem is going to make 7 canopies, sukkos, 7 ruchniistika sukkos for every single tzaddik. And again, it's Chuppah Shiva, and this is based on a pasuk that says, V'sukkah tiyeh l'tzel yamam. Again, this is a pasuk in Yeshayahu that describes how the sukkah will protect you from the sun and from the wind and from the snow and from all the different things, and it enumerates 7 things. And the Gemara in Bava Basra darshans that this is a remez to the sukkah sliyasid lavai that will protect you from all of the destructive forces. So we have Yom Hadin, we have Mechilas Havaynais, we have Sukkos Shiva, the canopies, and then we finally have, and also Sukkah is called Zman Simchasenu, because that represents the pasuk, again in Yeshayahu, V'yamdu Zarim, that we will be panoi for Avodas Hashem, and non-Jews will do a lot of our work. Zarim will graze your sheep and the like. Rav Avadia got in a lot of trouble for this. Rav Avadia was in his famous, infamous sometimes, Motzei Shabbos Shir. He mentioned, Goyim were created just to be the slaves of the Jews and everything. And again, that's a little misunderstood. We're not really talking about slavery. Baruch Hashem, I got a Goy to be my slave. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, in a much more positive sense, that the Umos HaOlam are going to recognize the holiness of the Torah. And they're going to recognize the greatness of Am Yisrael. And they will want to have a share in helping Klal Yisrael continue to sanctify God's name. So they will undertake a lot of the gashmias, a lot of the materialistic needs of society. The nations of the world will supply. Again, so don't look at it. I don't think the idea is, I got this slave that I get to beat. All the years they beat me, now I get to beat them. That's not. I don't think that's really the picture that's being drawn. The picture that's being drawn is the voluntary aspect of the non-Jewish world wanting to help Klal Yisrael in their spiritual mission. And that is what's called Zaman Simchasenu of Sukkos, because the Simcha is when we're panoi to learn and to serve Hashem, and the Gashmias is taken care of by other forces. V'yachar kach, and then we come to Shmini Atzeres, and by Shmini Atzeres we say, Yichlu ha'koifrim b'elokei emes. Those who deny God will be wiped out, and the Simcha will be a unique Simcha with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, we know, Chazal say this, that on Sukkos, we bring 70 bulls. The total number of Musafim on Sukkos are 70, and they are connected the 70 nations of the world. And they're brought in descending order, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 6, 7. And that takes you to Hoshana Rabbah. Shmini Atzeres, the Musaf is only one bull, one par. It's a totally different cheshbon, right? Because you went 13 to 7, then you go 1. And Chazal say that Shmini Atzeres is a Seuda Ketana, is a small, intimate meal between Hashem and Bnei Yisrael. The mashal it gives is to a melech. Imagine a melech. A melech had many, many countries, and a melech made a big mishta for all of his countries, like Achashverosh, right? 180 days. This is a 7-day mishta. And then, at the end of the 7-day mishta, with all of the ambassadors, everybody goes home, and the melech tells his best friend, now that we've gotten rid of all the crowds, let's you and I have a cup of coffee in the kitchen, a small, intimate meal together. Shmini Atzeres is the small, there's only one par, a small, intimate celebration of Hashem's unique relationship with Am Yisrael. So the Gemara is saying, and this is a very, very unclear description, the Gemara is saying that Sukkos will be a fulfillment of the pasuk that the non-Jews will be working our lands for us, contributing, our material welfare. But then will come a Shmini Atzeres in which they'll kind of vanish, and it will just be Hashem's relationship with the Jewish people. Meaning, instead of the notion of this universalistic aspect of the Umos Ha'olam being Mishtatev, at some stage it will be only Bnei Yisrael with Hashem Levadai, and that's why Shmini Atzeres is called Atzeres Tiyeh Lochem. Atzeres is a day of cessation, stopping from work. It shall be Lochem, for you, because the Avodah of Shmini Atzeres, the Umos Ha'olam, have no connection to. Now, so we have what? We have Yom Hadin, we have Yom Salichas Avonos, we have Chupos Sheva, the 7 canopies, Ura'u, Maslashen, V'yamdu Zorim, Ura'u Tzomchem, and then we have Yisrael Levadai Atzeres Tiyelachem. So the Chagei Tishrei correspond to processes of Geula. Now, I do want to point out something, just to clarify this. The Gra does not mean that these stages will happen in the month of Tishrei. He's not saying the Yom Hadin of the future will be Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur and Sukkot Shmini Atzeres. In fact, we're not given the dates that these things occur. And these things are not going to occur in 1 year anyway. There may be, hundreds of years between them. Maybe thousands of years between them. Okay, so it's important to understand he is not correlating these stages to the dates of the Yom Tovim. See, this way, I want to be Miyashav Hastira. This is why I'm saying this. Here, the Gra correlates 4 stages of Geula to the Chagim of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkos, and Shmini Atzeres. And they're all correlated to Tishrei dates. Now, you may remember, at the very beginning of Perek Yud Aleph, the Gra brought the Mishnah in Maseches Rosh Hashanah that there are 4 days of judgment, 4 Yemei Hadin. Pesach, we are judged on the grain. Shavuos, we are judged on Peirei Sa'ilon, on the fruit. Rosh Hashanah is when people are judged. Kol Boi Olam Ovrim Lefanav. And Sukkos, we are judged on the water. So the 4 Yemei Hadin in the Mishnah and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is not mentioned in that list per se, right? The 4 Yemei Hadin are Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos. Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, and Sukkos. Now there, the Gra did correlate events of Geula with those particular dates. He says that the first stage of Geula will be the liberation of the 10 Shvatim. He says, B'Pesach, skip that. B'Pesach yigalu me'ashibud. On Pesach time, the shibud, the subservience, the enslavement of the Umos Ha'olam will be taken off the Jewish people. We will no longer be avodim. On Rosh Hashanah, there will be a Gemar Din against the enemies of God. On Sukkos, there will be ingathering of the exiles to Eretz Yisrael. On Shavuos, there'll be ingathering of the exiles. On Sukkos, there'll be Binyan Beis HaMikdash. So, what I want to correlate here, and again, I don't have this worked out myself, is I want to compare the events that are described in Sif Aleph with the events that are described in Sif Yud. So we're chazering a little bit. In Sif Aleph, this is what the Gemara says. Pesach, there will be a shibud, there'll be a liberation from shibud malchias. That's Pesach. Rosh Hashanah, now note here the following. Remember, the Gemara is making this longer than a year. In the Jewish calendar, it's Pesach, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot. Right? Obviously, Shavuos is the next holiday. But the Gemara is saying that's not the order of the redemption. The order of the redemptive events are Pesach, Rosh Hashanah, Sukkot. I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up. I'm sorry. There's a Pesach, Rosh Hashanah, Shavuos, Sukkot. So how long is that? That's like a year and a half, right? Yeah, that's 18 months, right? 18 months, huh? At least. It's not an Ibri. Yeah. Okay? So that's very important. When it says that the first stage of redemption is Pesach, the next stage of redemption is Rosh Hashanah, the next stage is Shavuos, and the last stage is Sukkot. Okay? So that's the first thing that he's doing. He's not taking the Mishnah in order. Now, of those four stages, Pesach, Yigalu min hashibud. Then Rosh Hashanah, Gemar din bi'oivei Hashem. Then Shavuos, Kibbutz Golios, and he actually says Al Yidei Moshe Rabbeinu. That's an interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu will bring all the Jews back to Eretz Yisrael. And Sukkos will be Binyan Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara brings, this is really from his Perish and Tikunei Zohar, that the Gemara brings that the Binyan Bayis Shalishi, coming down Min HaShamayim, or however you understand it, will be during Sukkot. L'chayra, that only works if the binyan comes down Min HaShamayim. If we have to build it, we're not allowed to build on Yom Tov or Chol HaMoed. So if it comes down, if Mamish means Sukkot, now again, it could be these are approximate, meaning when you say on Sukkot, it doesn't have to mean on Sukkot. It could be, around the Sukkot season, before, a little after, but that's the Tekufa. That Sukkot is, in fact, there are other midrashim that say the third mikdash will be built in Cheshvan. Perhaps by a stretch, you can even call Cheshvan, Sukkot, in the sense that it's in that Tekufa. Now here in Sif Aleph, we actually are correlating the redemptive events to these dates. Pesach, this will happen. Rosh Hashanah, this will happen. Shavuos, this will happen. Sukkos, this will happen. Right? So you're dealing with messianic redemptive events correlated to these holidays. Masha'en Kain, in his discussion at the end in Sif Aleph, when he correlates the Tishrei Chagim to events of Geula, he is not saying that those events are going to happen in the month of Tishrei. Rather, he just means that the events of the Yomim Tovim correspond to events Liyasid Lava, but there will be different days. So that's one thing that just to be sure you understand the difference between the correlations that he makes between the four Yemei Din and the Chagim of Tishrei, the holidays of Tishrei, right? They're a little different. But then, let's go on another question. Let's correlate the four events and see. In other words, in Sif Aleph, the four events are Bitol Shibud Malchias. Number 2, Gemar Din B'Oivei Hashem. Number 3, Kibbutz Golios. Number 4, Binyan Beis Hamikdash. Right? Those are the four we get from Sif Aleph. Now, what are the names, what are the designations that we have in Sif Yud Aleph? It's like a different set of designations, although there is a little bit of overlap. Rosh Hashanah is Yom Din HaGadol. Now that does fit because in Sif Aleph he also said Rosh Hashanah is Gemar Din B'Yoyvei Hashem. Okay, that's Yom Din HaGadol. Then we have Yom Kippur, which is Salicha. Now that wasn't even mentioned in the first list at all. Okay. Then Sukkos, which in the first list was Binyan Beis HaMikdash. Sukkos here is described as Chupai Sheva, which means the divine canopies that protect us. But hey, that's not such a contradiction. That could be Nichlal in the Beis HaMikdash. Uru'u, Zorim, and strangers will gather. And then he brings in Shmini Atzeres, which again was not brought into the first list. That is Hashem's unique relationship with Klal Yisrael. So just something to think about, meaning the Gemara has different listings of things, and the listings don't always completely match. Okay, we'll come back to it, but I just wanted to point out, though, that in Pshat, be sure you understand that in the first listing, he was actually correlating the redemptive events with the calendar. In the second listing, he's just referring to the Ramazim in the month of Tishrei about different things, but he's not saying it's going to happen in Tishrei. The only thing that's going to happen in Tishrei is what the Gra said already in the first one, that on a Rosh Hashanah there'll be a Gemar Din, and then on a Sukkot a year and a half later, a year later, there's going to be Binyan Beis HaMikdash. Okay, we'll come back to it, but just in Pshat, you need to clarify the relationship of these two passages. Now he then says, V'yeichlu shalai seudai shel Shabbos. We know that the Messianic era is described by Chazal as Yom Shekulai Shabbos, the day of the eternal Shabbos. So now the Gemara says, on Shabbos you got to have 3 meals. So there is a bechina, there is a level of 3 meals of the Messianic era. What are the 3 meals? Okay, these are all symbolic, spiritual meals. One is Behemos Bahararei Olev. 2 is Seudas Livyasan, and the 3 is Yahin HaMashur. Okay, let me just explain what these references are. That is at the end of the book of Eov. Right? Throughout the book of Eov is a righteous person, and all sorts of bad things are happening to him. And the whole book of Eov is a discussion of the fundamental problem of why do tzaddikim suffer if Hashem is compassionate and the like. And Eov's friends tried to tell him, well, it must be you're not such a tzaddik. That's why these things are happening to you. And Eov says, no, I want Hashem. I want Hashem to explain this to me because you guys don't know what you're talking about. And they always say, be careful what you ask for because you might get it. And at the end of the Sefer, HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to Eov. And he shows Eov the wonders of the natural world, as if to say, the world is so complicated, complex, and beautiful, you can't understand it at all, so my ways are beyond your comprehension. So he shows Eov all sorts of things, snow and ice and planets and stars, sun and moon. It's like, as if he takes him all over the universe. And at some point he shows him some of the wonders. He shows them the behemoths, which is very unusual. Behemos is, of course, plural. But it's used there as, the word behemoth is just behemoth. He shows them a huge animal, a mighty, mighty animal. Now there's a whole machlokas exactly. What is the behemoth? The behemoth, what is it? So some Meforshim say it's a hippopotamus, and they actually want to say it's a huge animal that just drinks up rivers. That's it. Just he drinks up the river. By the way, hippopotamus. People have an impression that hippopotamus is kind of like a gentle creature. Very, very far from it. Don't mess with the hippopotamus. No, I mean obviously they're unbelievably strong, but they're actually very, very ill-tempered and aggressive. So, Baruch Hashem, we're not likely to meet one around here, but it is keep away from it. Anyway, but no, I have not. but they're very, very, very dangerous animals. I mean, they're vegetarians. They're not carnivorous, but they just don't like to be interfered. They don't like to be interfered with.
They're responsible for the most deaths of people.
Yeah, they're very, very dangerous animals. So some say the behemoth is literally hippopotamus, but others say the behemoth is an animal that Hashem has in Gan Eden, that liyosid lavai will become a seuda for tzaddikim. And then we have the second animal Hashem shows Eov is the Leviathan, which maybe is a little more familiar to us, the Leviathan. And the Leviathan is described as a gigantic sea serpent that breathes fire. It's really the lahavdil, the medieval Christian descriptions of dragon are taken from the Leviathan that breathes fire and all sorts of things. And once again, we are told, Liyasid Lavai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will take the Leviathan, and from the ohr, the skin of the Leviathan, he'll make the sukkos, right? The Sheva sukkos, the Sheva chupos, and the meat of the Leviathan will also be served by the tzaddikim. So it turns out, in a literal way, again, the pshat is figurative, but in a literal way, the tzaddikim will eat from the behemoth, and they will eat from the Leviathan. So there's a very, very, so essentially it's meat and fish. So essentially the Welt says a nice word. Why does Hashem have to give two courses, the meat and the fish? So it says because some people aren't going to trust even HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hashgacha. I only eat fish. I don't eat, I don't eat the behemoth. But the emes is, I think that's an unfair shtach, because the emes is, Chazal say beferish that the behemoth is not shechted by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rather, HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes a war between the Leviathan and the behemoth, and they're fighting each other, and the Leviathan takes one of its sharp fins and it cuts through. So here could be, maybe it's not even a kosher shechita. Here you have an animal that's doing the shechita. Forget it, it's a good kasha. So maybe you're right to eat Leviathan. Okay. Now, obviously, there are many, many Mamari Chazal that talk about the meal of Leviathan. In fact, so the Gemara says there are three meals that are being described here. There is the meal of the behemoth. There is the meal of Leviathan. Okay, also a meal. And the third is that there is wine that has been kept inside the grape all the way back from Sheshes Shemei Bereshis, that God created grapes with wine in them. And that wine has been meshumar in the anovim. Right? People like to age wine 10 years, 20 years. This goes back, 5,784 years, and then whatever number of years until it will be opened, so to speak. And the Gemara says, again, interesting chiddush, the Gemara says, these correspond to the three meals of the Yom Shekulei Shabbos, the Seudas Behemoth, the Seudas Leviathan, the Seuda of Yayin HaMeshumar B'Anovim. Now we're going to see that the Gra himself will interpret this in a spiritual way, although he doesn't offer, at least the Evan Shelaima does not give us a complete hesber, because the whole musig of Eilam Haba is not about the Gashmiistic eating anyway, but the Gra is correlating the Shalosh Seudes of Shabbos to 3 Seudes of the Yom Shekulei Shabbos. So now let's read a little more. He says, what is Seudas Leviathan? Right, the Suda of the Leviathan. So he says, Hu hadas shetisrabe b'oretz, shehu asimcha hagedela asher ein l'mayla mimena. The Suda of Leviathan is a symbolic description of the fact that the greatest bracha that will happen when Mashiach comes, greater than the Beis HaMikdash, greater than all of those things, is that the das of Hashem, the understanding of God, will fill the world. All of us will reach a higher madrega in our understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This indeed, if you look at the very last halacha in the Rambam, in the Mishnah Torah, where he discusses Mashiach, or at the end of the Mishnah Torah. So he says that Imosa Mashiach, we don't yearn for it because of political power. We don't yearn for it because we're a country that everybody's paying tribute. We yearn for it so we will have Das es Hashem. And he ends the Mishnah Torah, the great Mishnah Torah, with the pasuk, Umala haaretz das es Hashem. The world will be filled with knowledge of Hashem. Kamayim layam mechasim. As the water covers the ocean floor, so shall the knowledge of Hashem cover the earth. Kamayim layam mechasim. So I think it's b'shem the Chavetz Chaim. I'm not sure, but he says like this: why is the das that will come into the world, Nimosa Mashiach? Why is that described? Kamayim layam mechasim. So he says like this. He says, the ocean. Every inch of the ocean could be a different depth, right? There are places of the ocean that are hundreds of feet deep, and places that are shallow. Meaning, how much water does a given spot have depends on how deep the crater is, right? The deeper the crater, the more water there's going to be there. So he says that's the same thing with Das es Hashem. We're like this, we will be covered, so to speak, with Das of Hashem. But how much Das we will have depends on how much we worked, meaning to say the more we were miyageya, the more we excavated ourselves, the more we made ourselves a receptacle for the Chachmas HaTorah, then the more Torah we will have. You see, meaning like this. If in your life you dug a hole that's only 2 feet deep, you will have shallow, you'll still have Das, you'll have shallow Das, you'll have 2 feet of water. You dig something that's 100 feet deep, it'll be 100 feet of water. Dig something a mile deep, it'll be a mile deep of water. Kamayim layam, the same way the water covers up the halal of the ocean, that's the Das. In fact, this is a famous mashal of the Noda B'Yehuda. The Noda B'Yehuda, his sons bring in a Hakdama, that he gave this mashal, that in Eilam Hazeh, we don't really understand anything. But in Eilam Haba, we will only understand that which we worked on in Eilam Hazeh. So he gave the mashal of a family that was shipwrecked on a deserted island. And there were no svarim, there was nothing to learn. So the parents figured, they had young children, they figured, okay, listen, we can't learn anything, but at least I'll teach my children how to read. I can do an aleph base in the sand and whatever it is. I can teach them how to read. So they're drawing aleph, base, and gimel, and they have nekudas, aleph, aw, ba, ah, ga, right? All those different things. And the kids were smart kids, and they're wondering, why is Abba wasting his time every day with ah, ba, ga, da? He's just teaching us nonsense syllables that don't mean anything. They have no particular shaykhus. They don't help us live in this desert island, right? They're not teaching us how to get food or how to build a shelter. And they thought that all of those things were meaningless nonsense syllables. But then they finally, they get saved and they get back to civilization. And now they see that all of the nonsense syllables, they can read this and that, and they can learn this and that. Divrei Kodesh, Divrei Chol. That being able to read opened up a world of knowledge to them. But had they not spent all that time on what they thought was insignificant, they wouldn't have had any ability to access. So says the Noda B'Yehuda, this is the mashal of Eilam Hazeh. In many, many ways, our ability to grasp Torah is so superficial that it's like, ah, ga, da, it's like just syllables, nonsense syllables. But if we didn't do that, then we're not going to be zeicha to understand it in Olam Haba. Whatever the multiple, I can't give you a multiple. Pick a multiple, 100. In other words, you will understand 100 times more than you understand here. That's fine. Or 1,000 times more, or 1,000,000 times more. Whatever it is. But 1,000,000 times 0 is going to be 0. In fact, this is one of the arguments in favor of Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi, in the yeshiva world, it's a little controversial, because, Daf Yomi, superficial, you're doing it quick, etc. Isn't it better to do Ian? But one of the stronger cases for Daf Yomi, not at the expense of your star, but, as something to consider, or Amud Yomi, it doesn't have to be Daf Yomi, but whatever it would be, is that it is important that we are mishtadel to see as many different parts of Torah as we can, because we will only understand in Olam Haba those areas of Torah that we learned in Olam Hazeh. So, if all you spent was learning Nashim and Nezikin, then Bezras Hashem, in Olam Haba, you will have a deep Havana of Nashim and Nezikin. But if you never did Seder Kachim, you will not understand anything in Seder Kachim. Everything is a multiple of what you did in this world. And therefore, there is a tayeles to be exposed to every chelek of Torah. Maybe not every, might be impossible, but as many chalokim of Torah as is shayach, because on that will be your Havana basis. And that's Kamayim L'Yom HaChasim. So back to the Gra. So the Gra says, Sudas Livyasan is a remez to the Simcha Gedaila of Riboy, the increase of Das Hashem. Now, he doesn't explain exactly how do you get that. So here's what he says. He says, number one, that's why we find that Moshe Rabbeinu is called Livyasan. Now again, this comes from a play on words. To be Malaveh somebody is to escort them. So Moshe Rabbeinu is like God's escort, because he's so close to Hashem. So Riboy Hadas means I have a shaykhus to Hashem. It's like I'm Malaveh HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? So therefore the Sudas Livyasan is the Riboy Hadas. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu is called Livyasan. And that is the meaning of the pasuk in Tehillim in Borchi Nafshi that we say every Rosh Chodesh. Livyasan yatzarta l'sachik by, you created Livyasan to play with. Again, the Gemara says Livyasan is Hashem's pet. But he explains that l'sachik doesn't just mean to play with, but it's a source of joy, because das is the greatest simcha. That's the sachik. This is Hashem's delightful play with the righteous. That he will give them new chidushim, new understandings of the Torah that they learned. That's the Sudas Livyasan. That is the Riboy Hadas. That is the Shashua. That is the delight of HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving tzaddikim, at least those who are Zaycha, Chidushay Torah. And indeed, this is what we find by Matan Torah. Vayechasu es Elokim vayechlu vayishtu. It says that the 70 elders gazed at the Shekhinah and they ate and drank. So it's interesting. So the Gra is looking at that pasuk as a positive way. Eating and drinking does not mean they were physically eating and drinking, but their neshamos were eating and drinking mizif hashchina. Now again, we'll talk later about this. The Gra is using this pasuk as a positive statement. In reality, Chazal have other interpretations, that they were physically eating and drinking, and it was an Aveira, and it was one of the reasons not of an Aviyu died later. So that's a big machlokas, is Vayechlu v'yishtu, physical eating, and it was sinful, or is it spiritual tainug and pleasure, which of course is a great thing. The Gra is learning the second way. And that's what he says. Vayechasu, they saw God. Now it doesn't mean they saw God. God doesn't have a body, but it refers to Re'iyah is hasaga. Seeing is used to refer to comprehension, understanding, right? You see, right? By the way, they point out, I think Hasidus, an old Hasidic Shavort, that, when the Gemara wants to call something to your attention, like a brisa, so it says, Ta, Shma, come and hear, come and listen. In the Zayar, when it wants to call your attention to something, it says, Chazi, come and see. So it's interesting. They point out that when a person is Zaycha to the higher Madrega of comprehension of Hashem, that is called Re'iyah, seeing. Seeing. The lower level is called Shemiah, hearing. And there is a difference between seeing and hearing. Hearing is sequential, and seeing is simultaneous. Right? In other words, if somebody is telling me something, so I hear one word, then I hear the other word. When I see the whole picture at once. So the idea of a deeper understanding is I see the whole picture as opposed to a little bit at a time. So therefore, when it says, going back, Vayechazu es Elokim, Vayechazu, they saw God, it means they comprehended Hashem. And when it says they ate and they drank, it doesn't mean they physically ate and drank, but this was food to their soul. This was a delight. This was a tainug. This was a shashua. Shashua, lulei seirascha shashua. Without your Torah, that is my delight. And the Vilna Gaon says, and that is what it means, the Seuda of Leviathan. Riboy, 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 hadas. And this comprehension of God is the meaning of the phrase, or haganuz l'tzadikim. Right? Chazal say there's the hidden light that God will make available to tzaddikim. It doesn't refer to some physical light, but the light is the hasaga that Hashem will give to the tzaddikim as they have a deeper and deeper interpretation of the Torah. And what that means, therefore, is v'yiyah penimius haTorah behiskalos. The inner secrets of the Torah will become revealed. Kamo achsha pshuto shel Torah, the same way that we can grasp the simple meaning of the Torah. We or the tzaddikim at least, will be able to grasp the penimius of the Torah. Now that's interesting though, because you wonder, maybe that just means that the nister will exist on a higher level, meaning there is sod, but they say, we have pshat, simple pshat, remez, allusion, drash, and sod. It's pardes. But it's brought down that each of those levels have 4 levels, and you can keep on going. In sod, for example, there's pshat of sod, there is remez of sod, there's drash of sod, there is sod of sod, and in sod of sod, there's pshat of the sod of sod. So I wonder how that's going to work, meaning Hashem is going to make the sod pshat. Okay, so if the sod is pshat, then sod is going to be, much, much, much deeper, meaning ultimately this is never ending. Hashem is infinite. There is no such thing as an end, right? Now, depending on the tzaddik, the greater the tzaddik, the higher level he'll get, but he'll never get to the end. That's why Hashem is described. Ein sof. There is no end, right? But he says at least the things that in this world we look at as sod, that's going to be behiskalos, like pshat. That's what he says. The sod is going to become the pshat. And then he says, al kain yiyeh cherus mikol hamakatrigim. And once we can link to the penimius of Torah, we become liberated from all the negative and destructive forces. Now this actually ties in to what the Gra said at the beginning of the parak again, where he said that the Ikar HaGeula will come through in the merit of Limud HaTorah. Okay, that's good. And then he says, Ubiprat, learning of Kabbalah. Right, the Gra says that it'll be learning of Kabbalah. Because the Gra is saying here that when you can link yourself to Penimius, that frees you from all of the negative forces. Now there is a certain catch-22 here, because you can only be Zeicha to Side if you liberate yourself from those negative forces, meaning if you're connected to sin and everything else, you're not going to be Zeicha to Sod. But he says that through your connection to Sod, the powers that are makatreg, the powers that try to destroy you, you will be liberated from. And this is what he brings in the pasuk. It's really very, just looking at the language. This is a pasuk that we say in Tashlich, which is from Yeshayahu. Lo yeirou v'lo yashchisu. They shall not do bad to you, and they shall not destroy you. Ki mola ha'aretz deya. Because the land is filled with das. Kamayim layom mechasim, as the sea covers, right, as the water covers the seabed. So, look, again, I mean, we don't really understand what's going on here, but just in terms of the pasuk, they shall not destroy you because the world will be filled with das. What's the because in that sentence? They, meaning the negative powers, shall not destroy you because the world is filled with das. So let me give you first Pashat Pshat and then show you how the Gemara is giving you a little bit of a chiddush here. The Pashat Pshat is, if the whole world is filled with das, that means even the negative people have picked up das. So they're not going to try to destroy me because they have das Hashem. That's Pashat Pshat, meaning if the whole world becomes better, they're not going to try to destroy me, right? Hamas will be out of business. But the Gemara is saying a different Pshat. The Gemara is saying, if you're filled with das, in other words, you're connected to the Panemius Satira, the Makatrigim will not have any power over you. See, Chiddush, it's a little different than you might assume. That when you're filled with das, the Makatrigim will not get you. Now, so that is the Sudas Levyasan. And the Gemara says, Yayin Meshumar, the Yayin Bi'anavim is the same thing. Because the Panemius of Torah is called wine, and that wine that's stored up, that'll be available, is once again another way of sodos being the skala. Two meals. Now, what's interesting is this passage doesn't explain the Suda of Behemoth. Remember, he started off with there are 3 Shabbos meals. Sudas Levyasan, Sudas Behemoth, and Yayin HaMeshumar Bi'anovim. Now he says Yayin HaMeshumar Bi'anovim and Sudas Levyasan both represent the Iskalos of Panemius Satira. He doesn't really explain what the Sudas Behemoth is. By the way, though, it's interesting that, I wanted to bring a right that maybe the Gra holds you can be Yaitse Sudas Shalishis with Yayin. But that's not a right, because obviously he's not dealing with bread, benkach or benkach, because Sudas Behemoth and Sudas Levyasan, he also didn't mention bread. So apparently the hamotzi is a separate issue. He's only giving you the main course. So there's the meat meal, there's the fish meal, and there's the wine meal. And whether there's bread, that's a separate issue about Sudas Shalishis. Okay, but again, we'll come back over this, but just very, very fascinating that the 3 meals are correlated to these different levels of understanding. But again, unfortunately, in the Even Shelaima at least, he does not tell us the significance of the Sudas Behemoth. Okay, we'll stop here.